Welcome back everyone. As some of you may know, the OnePlus Nord was a OnePlus device that OnePlus, out of all people, released last year. So let's go and take a look at it, see how it holds up in 2021. Now this phone is barely even a year old. It's like a little bit over a year old. I didn't have it for, the year that, or like the month it came out. I got it much later. But when it first came out, I was actually pretty happy about it. I think it was a pretty cool, interesting phone. And I do think within the next couple of years, the Nord series of devices are probably going to be their number one device. And I think maybe like their Pro devices, like the OnePlus 9 Pro, and those are probably not going to be their most expensive, or they're probably not even going to sell them anymore, to be honest. I feel like they're going to focus on the Nord because they're the cheapest ones and they're probably selling better than the OnePlus 9 series. Now, if you want to pick up a OnePlus Nord, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, on the front of this device, we have that 6.44-inch Fluid AMOLED display, and it's a 90Hz panel. So it's 1080p, and definitely nothing super crazy, but I do think overall it's a pretty good looking display. 90Hz like I mentioned, and overall, it's a pretty good looking display. Dual camera setup on the front, which is pretty interesting. We don't really see that too often. And overall, I think it looks pretty good. Obviously like the OnePlus 9, that definitely has a better looking display, but this one doesn't even look that bad. And like I mentioned, having that dual camera setup on the top left, it actually looks pretty good. It's very, very reminiscent of the S10 Plus. And I'm not too sure why Samsung removed that either, because I really like that kind of design. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the front. There's really nothing else going on. You have USB Type-C on the bottom, and on the back you have pretty much a glass back, but it felt more plastic in my opinion. But it does have a pretty cheap plastic frame, so that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. Definitely not a big ginormous deal, but it is something to keep in mind at the end of the day. So when it comes down to this, I think it's pretty much okay, but the body doesn't feel extremely premium, so that's another thing to keep in mind. You do have an inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display, which is good, but definitely the design of like the OnePlus 9 is something I really do prefer. So in terms of the outside, that pretty much covers it up, but we do have that camera setup on the back, which we'll go ahead and hit on right now. So it has that 48 megapixel wide angle lens, an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor, 5 megapixel depth sensor, and a 2 megapixel macro lens. And overall, what I can tell you is that this camera setup is actually pretty good. I've always preferred, having more cameras than not. In this specific case, we really only get a dual camera setup that's really worthwhile. And the other two lenses are a little bit different. The depth and the macro lenses, definitely not my cup of tea. I'm not a humongous fan of those, but again, it is something to keep in mind. Now with this type of camera setup, 4K at 30, which is already kind of a downer because I would prefer 4K at 60. However, which is something really, really weird. I don't really see this too often. With that dual camera setup on the front, the 32 megapixel wide and 8 megapixel ultra wide, you do apparently have the ability of shooting 4K at 60 on the front. So I don't really know why they did that, and I think like the OnePlus 9s don't even do that yet either. So I don't know why OnePlus put it on this device. I don't remember testing it, but that is something that was pretty crazy when I first heard about it. It genuinely did not make any sense to me. So when it comes down to the camera setup, I think overall I'm happy about it. I think it's good enough, but even a phone like a Pixel 4a's camera kind of did look pretty good too. And I think in some ways it may have looked a little bit better than this in terms of a post-processing standpoint. But I think with this specific device, I guess it gets the job done. There's really not too much more to kind of say for this, but just know that if I was somebody who wanted to get a device like this, I would probably, say the camera is probably the most average thing about it. It's not a huge deal breaker, but it's not something I'm like, wow, you have to pick up this phone because of the camera. It's just something that's kind of an afterthought, and I guess it's cool that this thing has it. So I think in terms of that pretty much covers it up in a camera standpoint. Now let's go and head on the software. This is by far the most perplexing thing of this phone now. So before OnePlus's software was number one, I loved it. It was probably the best software in the game. Nowadays, it's a little bit of a different story. OnePlus is kind of switching away from Oxygen OS, and they're kind of getting more of an Oppo lineup. If you guys are aware of Oppo, it's pretty much a company that I guess merged with OnePlus, and it does seem like now the OnePlus software is not going to be the OnePlus software. It's going to be more so like, a Color OS, which is what Oppo has. And like I mentioned, I'm not a huge, fan of that. I think that's another pretty big problem, and I do think if you're going to pick up a phone like this, the software is one of those main things, and it doesn't really look like we're going to be getting a huge software enhancement on this specific device. So again, I think with this phone, if you're willing to custom ROM it and stuff, go for it. but I think as of this point, you may be better off if you stick with something maybe like even a Pixel if you prefer that type of Android, stock Android feeling. Other than that, you're pretty much stuck where you're at, and there's really not too much else going on. So in terms of software, that's pretty much what I think. But also the battery life is one of the better aspects of it. You have a 4,115 milliamp-hour battery, and that is a massive size battery to have on this type of device. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, getting a phone like this with this type of battery size is a huge plus. And as I mentioned before, it just helps and just improves this whole entire, lifespan of this phone. And it does kind of, make it a little bit better. I wasn't a huge fan of it before, but, it does make it a little bit better overall. So I think when it comes down to like a software and battery standpoint, software could have been better now, I guess, going in the future. But the battery life is something that I'm pretty happy about. And again, there's not too much going on that I'm like, wow, no, I hate this, battery. I hate this software. It's just, I wish it would be a little bit better for the future of this device. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now let's go and end it off with the performance. This device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset, an octa-core CPU, and Adreno 620 GPU, and 6 gigs of RAM on the base model, 8 gigs of RAM on the mid-tier model, and 12 gigs of RAM on that top-tier model. And I did have the base model of this device, and I was super happy about it. And like I mentioned before, man, this type of device with this type of performance is pretty good, it's on par with the Pixel 5, and I think, the Pixel 5's performance wasn't that bad. This one could have been a little bit better, and I think at this point, it's like whatever. But I think if you're going to be using this phone as an everyday device, I really don't have much to complain about. I think this phone is pretty much a good performing phone overall. And like I mentioned, there's not that much to hate on. I think it's good. Of course, if you wanted to take it up a notch, getting the regular OnePlus, the OnePlus 8 of that year, or the OnePlus 9 of this year, those could get you a better, performing phone. But whether you're doing light tasks, heavy intensive games, that kind of stuff, this is going to be doing you a pretty good justice in my opinion. So I think the OnePlus 9, that's pretty much how I would kind of sum it up. I think it's a pretty good phone. I think it has a great performance in it. For the most part, again, not perfect, but it gets the job done, and that's pretty much the main way I would put it. So that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.